This is Daniel Simon at Baton Rouge Community College. Of course, and this week I'll also have a review on the upcoming first exam, which will, of course, be on ancient Egypt. So here, of course, kind of go through today talking about a little about the review for our upcoming exam and Canvas for you to review. Here's some basic questions that are, going to be, of course, on the first exam. So I'll kind of go over these real quick, of course, for today. What are some geographic features that make the Nile unique? Well, I think I've talked about this before, how the Nile is one of the longest rivers in the world, over 4,100 miles long. Of course, longest, river in Africa and also, worldwide as well. Also, it's famous for flowing, south to north, which is kind of a geographic feature that is kind of unique. So it does have an unusual course that it does have. What famous quote is attributed to Herodotus on why Egypt flourished as a civilization? Herodotus said in Book 2 of the Histories of Herodotus, Egypt was the gift of the Nile. He's talking about the fact that the river gave birth to the civilization, and without it, that whole area would have been just nothing but desert and no civilization. So that's basically what he was talking about. What two tributaries form the main trunk of the Nile River? That, of course, is the White Nile and the Blue Nile. Blue Nile starts down in Ethiopia, kind of eastern Africa, and then Lake Victoria supposedly is one of the main sources that later feeds into the White Nile. But I think the Blue Nile is the main source of the Nile River. The two form a main trunk at Khartoum in the northern part of Sudan. What are these Egyptian terms such as cataract, comet, deshret? Cataract, of course, is those rapids and waterfalls that the Nile River goes down, in upper Sudan into Egypt. There's 6 cataracts, that the river runs through as it runs northward into Egypt. Kemet was the ancient hieroglyph name of what the Egyptians called Egypt, which translates usually as meaning black land. Then the word Egypt is more of a Greek term. Deshret was different translation. This means red land, usually for 2 reasons. One, because in the upper part of the lower Egypt, the king wore a red crown, remember correctly. And then they sometimes call the desert areas were also called red land too. It was the main season of Egypt when the Nile flooded. That was, of course, called the Aket. It really means inundation, but it usually happened in the summer, like around July. And then they had those other 2 growing seasons I told you about, like Peret, I think was another one, the sowing season. They have another called Shamu, which is the harvest, but pretty much they plant and grow crops usually twice a year. Let's see, what 2 Egyptian states merged at the end of the Neolithic period? You have the Upper Kingdom or Upper Egypt, and then you have the Lower Kingdom or Lower Egypt. Remember, they had different crowns that they wore. Upper Egypt had a white crown, and then Lower Egypt had a red crown. And so I think one was called White Land, Upper Egypt, and then Lower Egypt was called the Red Land or Deshret. I think I told you Hedjet was the name of the white crown. Which king unifies Egypt? What was his Egyptian name? That was King Menes, which the Greeks called him a long time ago, or sometimes called Men. And the Egyptians also called him Narmer, which they found on hieroglyphic writings of him going back to, I guess, around 3000 BC when he lived. What were some of his achievements of his reign? Well, first of all, he unified the state, was the main thing, where he merged the upper kingdom with the lower kingdom. He also was the first to wear the double crown of Egypt, which is red and white. And then, of course, he also founded their capital, which Memphis in the lower part of Egypt. His is the first of many dynasties of Egypt. They may have had 31 at one point. So his is the first of many pharaohs later, but you study about that period, they usually call that the pre-dynastic period, which is the first two dynasties, first and second dynasties, before the Old Kingdom comes in. What are the three main historical kingdoms or periods of Egypt? They have the Old Kingdom that comes in first. I'll get to it later, but it's got four main dynasties that it has, which the fourth dynasty is the most famous, one that built like the Giza pyramids. They have the Middle Kingdom. It's not as famous as the other two out of the three. And then you have the later one, which is the New Kingdom, which is more of an empire building period. Now, I told you they have these intermediate periods between them. I don't think you'll have to know those on the exam, but the second one you'll probably have to know about, the second intermediate period. What was the cult of Amun-Ra? That's sometimes a nickname they call a lot of the gods of Egypt, like the cults, especially dealing with the god Amun. Amun was kind of seen as the chief deity of ancient Egypt. It was later merged with the god Ra, which is the sun god of Egypt. And it's had a cult center at what is Thebes, where the Karnak temple complex is. Anubis was another ancient god also that was very famous. Anubis was more associated with embalming and mummification. He was kind of like a god of the dead as well, like Osiris. They had also, Anubis was famous for having its jackal head, like jackal-headed god. Horus was the falcon god. He was associated with war, the sky, kingship. He was part falcon, part man. Horus was deemed as a son of Osiris and Isis in some mythologies. Isis was predominantly a fertility goddess, kind of similar to Hathor. Really considered one of the greatest goddesses probably of ancient Egypt. Isis, of course, was the mother of Horus, also the wife of Osiris as well. I think Isis is usually associated with things like not just fertility, but sex, I think women, and also I think brewing as well, like brewing like alcohol, stuff like that. Osiris was the king of the dead in the underworld. There's of course some mythologies that he may have been like a king of Egypt a long time ago, and of course with that Osiris myth, he was supposedly reborn after Seth tried to kill him and take the throne of Egypt. Cyrus is usually in the form of a mummified, like a pharaoh, with the red and white crown. Set, or sometimes Seth, is of course the brother of Osiris. He was associated with things like infertility, deserts, chaos, also called storms. He was the one in that Osiris myth that tried to steal the throne from his brother Osiris. It was like a cat god of some type. Sobek is the crocodile god, of course, often associated with Fayum. He of course was a very powerful type god associated with the pharaohs and military stuff. And also, I think fertility, like male fertility, especially. And then Thoth, sometimes pronounced Toth, was, of course, the so-called bird god, was a type of god associated with like wisdom, knowledge, hieroglyphic writing, the god that gave the Egyptians papyrus, like to make paper out of and stuff like that. What was mummification? Mummification is kind of like a nickname they later called Egyptian funerary practices, where they would bury their dead for the afterlife. The word mummification or mummy is derived from what they call mummia, which was like a type of tar pitch substance that basically is like asphalt that they think was used in the actual mummification process. They would put it on the outside of the body, like a resin that they would help mummify the body over the mummy wrappings. And so that word mummy kind of evolved. But I think I told you, mummia was also like a type of medicine that they use, like put on wounds and things like that. And people would take it as medicine internally, like for internal medicine, such as stomach ailments or whatever. And sometimes they would call it mummy powder as well. What are the main processes of mummification? Well, I told you Herodotus is the oldest source. He said that they would remove the organs first, like the brain was removed through your sinus cavity, which they didn't keep that. Then they took all the organs out of your body, minus the heart that was kept in the body, because you know about the Egyptians, they believed that Anubis would weigh your heart in the afterlife, but the organs would be then put in what they call canopic jars to help preserve them. Then they would, of course, in the process, they would wash the body and stuff like that, of course, which Herodotus said. But then they would fill the body cavities with different ingredients, according to Herodotus. Then the main thing they did was they would cover the whole body in natron. Natron, was that mineral salt that they got from a salt lake west of, the Nile Basin. It was called Wadi Natron or something like that. And they would cover the body in that material to help preserve it and dehydrate it and get all the moisture out of it. Which that process I think was the longest one. And then they would wrap the body, of course, and then put like a resin coating of that mumia asphalt stuff on the mummy. There's other processes too, but those are the main ones, of course, that they mostly did with the whole process of mummification, which took like 70 days, like a long time. What is the nickname of the four gods that protected the canopic jars? They were called the four sons of Horus. I don't know if you really had to know those on the exam as much, but Domatef was the one that protected the stomach. Kabesanef protected the intestines. Hapi, which was also the god of the Nile flood or inundation, protected your lungs. And then Seti protected your liver. What dynasties dominated the Old Kingdom? There was the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth dynasty. So four main dynasties that were part of it. The one that's the most famous was the fourth dynasty, because that's the one that built the Giza pyramids and the Great Pyramid near Cairo. Why is the Old Kingdom nicknamed the Age of Pyramids? Because that's when the peak of the pyramid building happened in Egypt. They built the best pyramids, which the fourth dynasty, of course, was famous for that. What were Abydos, Saqqara, Giza examples of in ancient Egypt? These were necropolis sites where the Egyptians buried people. They're kind of like cities and cities of the dead. Abydos was the oldest one. It went back like 5,000 years ago. That's where like King Narmer or Menez had his first tombs there. Saqqara was near Memphis, the capital. And Saqqara was where they built some of the first pyramids, like the Pyramid of Zoser was built there. Giza is where the fourth dynasty Giza pyramids were constructed, like by King Khufu and Khafre, etc. And then I told you some other areas that were famous too, where they had pyramids built. Like I told you about Midam is one where they had pyramids, like the Midam Pyramid. Dashur had like the bent red pyramids constructed. And don't forget the Valley of the Kings is considered necropolis sites, but for the New Kingdom, which a lot of the pharaohs would construct rock-cut tombs to hide their tombs. But most of the tombs are all rock, whether it's Old, Middle, or New Kingdoms, which is true. What were mastaba, pronounced either way, I think. Mastaba were these mud brick tombs that were constructed by the Egyptians in the pre-dynastic period up through like the Old Kingdom. They do build them up to the New Kingdom, but not as well known. But mastaba, it means usually in Arabic, stone bench, I think is common. Some say mud bench because it was made out of mostly mud brick, looked like stone. And then I told you the Egyptians had their own name for these early tombs. They were called Perzit on hieroglyphs, which meant house of eternity. I think it's usually the main translation of it. Which dynasty and king developed the first step pyramid at Saqqara? That was King Zoser. And Zoser was one of the first, I think the second king of the third dynasty. And he started constructing the first pyramids at Saqqara, which is, I told you, the necropolis site of basically mostly the third dynasty and some other dynasties that came later. And his pyramid was called, officially, it's called the Pyramid of Zoser, but it is called different names. It's a 205 feet tall, I think was the original height. I don't know if you're going to need to know the height of some of these pyramids like that one, but that was how big it was. But um, basically, it was a rectangular shaped pyramid that was six-stepped, and it was designed by this architect who designed and built it, whose name was Imhotep. And Imhotep was supposedly not just a chancellor, he was some kind of polymath that was a genius who knew like math, science, and some people think he also knew like medicine. He was like a father of Egyptian medicine. And so he was very influential in really starting the whole process of the Egyptians building, pyramids. Because before that, they were building mastabas. Even I told you have large size mastabas like mastaba number 17, I think I may have mentioned before. But that's what the evolution of tomb design kind of goes to. Which king, who was the father of King Khufu, built the first true pyramids, like the bent and red pyramids? Yeah, that was King Snefru. Snefru was, of course, one of the founders of the fourth dynasty as pharaoh. He built several pyramids. He had one called the Midim Pyramid, which never was finished. And then they had the two that he built that were the famous ones were the Bent Pyramid and the Red Pyramid, which were built at the site of Dashur, which is like 20, 30 miles south of Cairo. And what's unique about these pyramids? Well, the Bent Pyramid was considered to be one of the first pyramids that was smooth-sided that they designed. And I don't know if the height is much with that one as important, but the reason why it was famous because it had a bent shape to it, because when they constructed it, it had 2 degrees of slope to the angle of it, bottom being 54 degrees, and then the upper slope being about 43 degrees. And so that's what gave it its strange look, which most pyramids are more three-dimensional and, similar slope on the top of it. But he abandoned it. It was never his tomb. And so he built the other one he built, which is the Red Pyramid at Dashur. By the way, the Bent Pyramid is sometimes called the South Pyramid, and then the Red Pyramid is called the North Pyramid, if you remember. And the Red Pyramid is often considered the first true pyramid that's actually built because it was, completed to like other pyramids later. I think I told you the height of it was like 344 feet, which I think it's still the third tallest pyramid in like Egypt compared to the Great Pyramid and the Pyramid of Khafre. So that's the one that became his tomb. It is sometimes called the Bat Pyramid because they find bats inside of it. And I told you they called it Red Pyramid later because after they stripped it off, they found out that the Egyptians had used local reddish limestone to build the outside of it. And so that's where it got its name. Who built the Great Pyramid at the Giza Plateau near Cairo? That, of course, was King Khufu, who was also called Cheops, which the Greeks called him that. What are some statistics about the Great Pyramid? It's the oldest and only seven wonder of the world that's still around, which the Greeks had talked about from a long time ago. Of course, the tallest pyramid ever constructed. The height, they think, originally was 482 feet. You at least know that. And I don't know about the width as much on each side, but I told you that the width on each side is about 756 feet, which I think the whole base of the whole thing, if you want to know, is like close to 13 acres. That's how much land it takes up, the actual Great Pyramid. They think by Napoleon's time, they had figured out that 2.3 million stone blocks were actually used to construct the actual pyramids. And I'll tell you that they think they were constructed by using some kind of skilled type labor, probably farmers, and this idea that slaves constructed, which Herodotus had claimed, has kind of been basically, they don't think that's true anymore. They do think that they use some kind of slopes, like mud brick, probably slopes to construct and move the blocks into place. But whether they use like pulley systems and lever systems, which I think sometimes Herodotus would talk about. in the histories of Herodotus, they don't know if that's true or not. They obviously probably had to have slopes that went up halfway and then probably dragged them up to the top of it, to the high points anyway. But they're not sure what happened to the actual, uh, slopes that they put in there to actually do that. So anyway, so yeah, ramping systems, as they call it, also, who knows what happened to that. What else? What two other major pyramids are at Giza as well? I think I told you that the other ones were the pyramid of Khafre. Khafre, also called Khephren, was the son of King Khufu or Cheops, and he constructed the second largest pyramid in Egypt, which went to a height of about 471 feet. And his was more simpler. Remember, I think I told you Khufu had a more complicated passageways and chambers in it, like something like 3 different chambers that were in it. His only had one, that of course they find later. But if you know about Khafre's pyramid, the thing that makes it unique compared to Khufu's is that it still has the upper casing, which you can see right there in that picture on the left, right above the Sphinx. It's still got that upper part of the casing. So some people confuse that with the Great Pyramid, but that's the Pyramid of Khafre. So his is like the second largest. And then they have one more, which is Menkaure or Mykerinos, who, of course, had the smaller of the 3 Giza pyramids. I think his was built, I told you, to a height originally of 215 feet. And I mentioned how they think it was a smaller pyramid because one of 2 theories they had, which was one, that the fact that the other 2 pyramids had kind of bankrupted the state. And so Menkaure couldn't build such a large pyramid. And I think I may sometimes talk about Herodotus kind of saying that maybe it was smaller because he was a benevolent ruler, didn't want to build such massive tombs, etc. What was the Great Sphinx? That was a royal statue that was constructed, they think, by King Khafre, which honored Khufu, like I guess from his reign, and it was actually part of Khafre's burial complex. It's kind of like sits in front of a causeway that runs to his pyramid, not the Khufu's Great Pyramid, and so that's why some people think he built it, and so they think the face on it is basically, Khafre's, etc. And I talk about how there's a lot of mysteries behind the Great Sphinx, like the nose being shot off and all that, but it has been, like I said, buried a few times before, which a lot of that is just from like natural accumulation of sand over time and people not caring to, I guess, uncover it or whatever. I don't know if I have to worry about the dimensions of it. I probably won't ask you that on the exam. What were the Queen's pyramids? These were pyramids that were constructed near the Great Pyramid of Khufu. Those were pyramids that were built to, I guess, rest the mummies of, I think, 2 of his wives of Khufu, then one of his mother. Queen Hatteferes, I think, was the one that had the best one that's still around. What were the pyramid texts developed in the Old Kingdom? The pyramid texts were these Egyptian funerary texts that were put on the walls inside the pyramids, and they later put them in like the tombs of, like, in the Valley of the Kings, like King Tut, etc. And I told you one of the first kings that would do that would be the Pharaoh Yunus did it in the 5th dynasty with his pyramid, and so all the other ones start doing it, afterwards. A lot of the pharaohs. So that was the 5th dynasty that did it. What was Egyptian hieroglyphs? That's just the Greek name for what they later called the writing systems of ancient Egypt, which I told you was kind of like this alphabetic language that was logographic and syllabic that eventually does become like an alphabet, kind of like A to Z, etc. The origin of the name, the Greeks coined it a long time ago. I think I told you that the term hiero was a Greek word meaning sacred or priestly. And then carvings means like writings, yeah, the part glyph, it means writings or carvings because they were written on stone or written on papyrus, pottery, etc. And they're called often sacred or priestly because later on, most of the people that could understand the actual language were the priests in the different uh, temples they had in Egypt, especially up to like Greek Roman times. They had cursive forms of Egyptian hieroglyphs. The two I gave you, I think they were the most famous, was hieratic, which was, I think, the one that was used a lot, especially like in the more upper affluent classes. Then Demotic was more of a cursive form used by the common people. Why was discovered Rosetta Stone important? When was it discovered? Rosetta Stone led to the deciphering of hieroglyphs, which was lost by the Middle Ages because of the fact that the language died out in use. They had better languages that came in: Greek, Roman, Greek, Latin, and Arabic, etc. And then what happened? They think it was part of why the discovery came about was Napoleon's forces invaded Egypt in 1798. The famous French general, later Emperor of France, who was trying to defeat Britain in what later became the Napoleonic Wars. And it was discovered in, I think it's July of 1799, inside of the fort in Rosetta, Egypt. Fort Julian was the name of the actual fort. And I think I told you that the guy that found it was a French soldier named Pierre Francois Bouchard. And he realized it was kind of important. They find out later it's got these languages on it, which are it was like actually an inscription for the coronation of King Ptolemy V of Ptolemaic Egypt, who lived about something like 2,200 years ago. And it was written, remember I told you, in three languages, right? Hieroglyphs, Demotic, and of course, Greek. Then who first translated it, like on the Rosetta Stone? That was Jean-Francois Champollion, who got a copy of it. And it's believed that around 1822 was when he actually translated it. So that led to the development of people knowing about the language and all the different kings and what they did of Egypt. And you can see on the left, that's the Rosetta Stone you're looking at, which is now resides in the British Museum because they got a hold of it, I think, in 1801, which is a big controversial thing, like I've talked about. What was the Middle Kingdom? It was like a weaker state between the Old and New Kingdoms. There was a period where they had this first intermediate period where the Old Kingdom collapsed. Then the Middle Kingdom came in, and that one included like several dynasties. Like I think the peak ones were like the 11th, 12th, 13th ones. I think usually around when it is, with the 12th dynasty being the one that's the most famous. That was the peak period. They sometimes include the 4th dynasty, I think, as well. There's like several dynasties that are kind of included in it, but they had different pharaohs. There's one pharaoh that's probably the most famous one they had. There's a bunch of them named Amenemhet the first, second, third, with the Amenemhet the third usually being the one that's the most famous one. I'll probably ask you about him the most because he's really the peak ruler of the Middle Kingdom, which is a ruler in the 12th dynasty. And he was very famous for building one of the last major pyramids of Egypt, like a large size one, which was the Black Pyramid, it's called, but it's collapsed, of course, since when he built it. Then you have the second intermediate period. That's when the Hyksos invasion occurred in Egypt. That happened around the 17th century. Who are the Hyksos? Where are they from? The Hyksos were believed to be some type of Asiatic peoples that came out of southwestern Asia. I think some people think they were Semitic, very similar to like the Hebrews or Israelites. There's even some theories that they may have just been somehow descended from them or related to them. And they came in, they were armed with like better weapons than what the Egyptians had. Like they had the composite bow, and I think the Scythe sword was brought in. And they had the horse-drawn chariot, which the Egyptians didn't have either one in Egypt. And there's different theories on what the name meant, Hyksos. Some believe it meant um, usually a ruler of foreign lands, I think, is usually a translation of what it means. And the sources on the Hyksos, like invasion, is mostly from two sources. Manetho, who was an Egyptian writer and priest who wrote a history of Egypt, but mostly through Josephus, who wrote his works down, like parts of his works anyway. But it's where we get a lot of information about the Hyksos. And Josephus thought that the Hyksos were somehow related to the Israelites, he believed. Who was the Egyptian pharaoh that drove the Hyksos out? That would be King Ahmose the First, who's considered to be the founder of the 18th dynasty and what would be the New Kingdom. So the 18th dynasty, after the Hyksos were driven out, the 18th dynasty is started in Egypt with the New Kingdom. What dynasties dominate the New Kingdom? It's predominantly three: the 18th dynasty, the 19th dynasty, and the 20th dynasty. The 18th dynasty is sometimes called the Tutmosid dynasty because you have a lot of pharaohs named Tutmos or Tutmosis that rule over it. And then the 19th and 20th dynasty is those dynasties are sometimes called the Ramessid dynasties because there's a bunch of pharaohs that have the name Ramses, like 11 of them actually ruled by that name, which Ramses II, known as the Great, is the most famous, of course, in the 19th dynasty. What was the Valley of the Kings? Where was it built in Egypt? The Valley of the Kings was a necropolis site where the New Kingdom pharaohs buried their mummies and their treasures in rock-cut tombs. They were built into like the mountains of the Valley of the Kings, and it's located in Upper Egypt. They call it sometimes Western Thebes, but it's located west of the city of Luxor today, or what was ancient Thebes a long time ago. So it's in southern Egypt. It's where they, of course, they had 62 tombs at one point. They were constructed in it. Most of them were robbed, of course, in ancient times, which the only one that's really they find later that's mostly intact is King Tut's tomb. What was the religious capital of the New Kingdom, especially for the cult of Amun? That, of course, was Thebes, where the center of that cult, I told you, was the Temple of Karnak, which most of that temple was constructed between the 18th and the 19th dynasties. Who was Queen Hatshepsut? She was, of course, a powerful female pharaoh of ancient Egypt. She, of course, was the pharaoh, actually the daughter of Tutmos the First, who, by the way, had been one of the first pharaohs that had buried his mummy in the Valley of the Kings. And so she later became the pharaoh after her husband died, who was Tutmos II. And she was famous for a lot of things. She, of course, was well known for spreading trade throughout Africa, like into parts of East Africa, like the land of Punt. I think it's called, or Punt, which is close to where Somalia is today. She also pushed down into Nubia, into Sudan, and they think that also that Egypt began to push into Canaan or the Levant. They start invading there and taking that over, which they will, because the New Kingdom becomes more of an empire, which is based in Africa, North Africa, and also in Southwest Asia as well. She's well known for her temple she constructed, the Temple of Hatshepsut, which that temple was supposedly designed by this famous steward under her, who was some kind of minister named Senamut, and the temple was constructed to honor her reign and also the god Osiris as well. It's considered one of the greatest temples ever constructed, of course, in Egypt, especially in the New Kingdom. It's actually located in Western Thebes, but they call that area Der al-Bari, which means the northern monastery, I think is the translation of the Arabic name, because Coptic Christians at one point had used that area, some of those temples, for like churches or monasteries. at one point. She did have a son. Of course, I think I mentioned. I don't know if you have to know about him, but Tutmos III, who would reign afterwards, and they think he may have been the pharaoh or other pharaohs that may have defaced her monuments and tried to erase her from history. But she's considered one of the greatest female pharaohs of Egypt, reigning something like 21 years at one point. Then we had Akhenaten, who originally was called Amenhotep IV. What religious change did Akhenaten make to Egypt? Remember correctly, he tried to create this monotheistic type Egyptian cult, which was based on a god called Aten. So that's the god that he forced upon the Egyptians. Aten was a type of solar deity, sometimes called the sun disk god. And he was trying to end a lot of the dominance of the Amen cult, which dominated from Karnak at Thebes, and so he changed his name from Amenhotep IV to Akhenaten, and then he moved the capital, if you remember correctly, to this city called Akhetaten, which is kind of like in central middle part of Egypt, which the Arabs later call it Amarna, and so they call that period when he reigns as the so-called Amarna period, which is for kind of a short time. That's, I want to say, 15, 20 years or less. The cult later failed, but Akhenaten also, of course, was well known for his famous wife and queen, you see on the left, which, of course, is Nefertiti, probably considered one of the greatest queens of Egypt because of her beauty. There's been statues of her that have been found that kind of prove that. Supposedly her name means the beautiful one has come, or something like that. But the other thing she's famous for, too, is that she may have reigned for a few years as a female pharaoh after Akhenaten died. But after her death, the cult, declined. They abandoned the capital of Akhetaten or Amarna. They went back to Thebes. Who is Tutankhamun? What did he achieve during his short reign? Of course, known as King Tut. He's, of course, considered one of the last major pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. He was known for his short reign, where he only reigned for like 9 or 10 years. And during his reign, his ministers and him restored the cults, like the cult of Amen, etc., and the other gods of Egypt, because they abandoned that god Aten. They got rid of it. Then they moved the capital from Akhetaten or Amarna to back to Thebes. So that's the main things that he did under his reign. Why was he called the Boy King? Because he reigned as a young boy or young man, and so he never really reigned much into adulthood, because remember, he died afterwards, and there's a lot of mystery still, of course, about his death. Was he murdered or was it natural? They're not sure. Who discovered his tomb in November 1922? It was found by Howard Carter, who was doing excavations, of course, in the Valley of the Kings. And, of course, that tomb, KV 62, is the most famous tomb, of course, they found in the Valley of the Kings because of the fact that it was found mostly intact with all of its treasures still in it. They found other mummies, like I think 21 other mummies have been discovered from the Valley of the Kings, but none of their treasures were found. They were all robbed. So what was the curse of the mummy? That was this kind of thing that the media or newspapers kind of invented, that people that went into the tomb died because of the fact that I guess the ancient Egyptians had either put a curse on the tomb or booby trapped it or whatever. And that's what caused people to die. But there were a lot of mysteries of people actually dying afterwards, which the most famous was Lord Carnarvon, who was the main benefactor that paid for the excavations of Howard Carter. There were two other rulers that reigned also. They had A and Horemheb that reigned afterwards as pharaohs who were ministers of King Tut, but the 18th dynasty died out. And then you get the 19th and 20th dynasties that come in, the Ramessids, who have a lot of pharaohs named Ramses. Who is Ramses II, who was known as the Great? He, of course, was a 13th century Egyptian pharaoh who's considered the greatest pharaoh of the New Kingdom, maybe even of all of Egypt, period. Anyway, Ramses is famous for a lot of things. He's known for being one of the longest reigning pharaohs in Egyptian history. Not quite I think he's the second longest, like 66 years or more is considered how long he stayed in power as a ruler. They said he lived so long that he outlived his sons and his grandsons. And I think eventually his great grandson became the pharaoh later. He also had a lot of children. I think he had 50 sons or more at one point. So he was often had nicknames like the Great Ancestor because of all the different, people he kind of, I guess, had children and all that he had with, etc. And then I think the Greeks had a name for him too, which they called him Ozymandias, was what they dubbed him. He's also considered, maybe the pharaoh that's in the, Exodus story where Moses, fights to free the Israelites, the so-called pharaoh, but they're not sure who the pharaoh really is. If Moses living in the 13th century, yeah, it could have been Ramses the Great, but they're not really sure. So that's kind of doubtful if he is or not. What were some famous temples he built in Egypt? The ones that he built that were the most famous, he and his father, whose father was Seti the First, probably one of the other great pharaohs of the 19th dynasty that's later, I think before him, which they have Ramses the First, the founder of the 19th dynasty, and then Seti the First, who came next, and then Ramses the Great. But Seti the First and Ramses the Great were famous for constructing the hypostyle hall, which is the main hall that was constructed as part of the Temple of Karnak. It's the greatest part of it. It's well known for its huge columns that are inside of that hall that holds up the main roof of it, which the columns are like 70 feet tall. He was famous for constructing part of the Karnak temple. He also built that famous temple, or several temples actually, the temples of Ramses the Great, which the one that was the most famous was the one at Abu Simbel, which has the famous 4 statues that are in front of it, which are like, I think, close to 70 feet tall. And that was a rock cut temple that he built to honor his reign and also the god Ra. Because that's one thing about the Ramses type pharaohs. They were kind of getting back into honoring Ra over Amun. That temple was famous for being moved. If you know about this, when they built the Aswan High Dam, which formed Lake Nasser, it was going to flood it, and so they had to move it. So, then the other temple he built was the Ramseum, which I think I told you that Jean-Francois Champollion had coined the name. That was his mortuary temple he built in Western Thebes, which was built to honor the god Osiris as well. What caused the New Kingdom to decline? In the 20th dynasty, one of the main things that caused the decline of the New Kingdom was the Sea People invasion that happened about 1200 BC or so. The actual invasion was repulsed by the Egyptians. I want to say under Ramses III was the pharaoh that repulsed it. But after that, Egypt began to decline. And so they never really recovered because of the fact that, Egypt, there was just other powers that were better than them that came in afterwards. In fact, the Nubians who were in Sudan would come in, they would take over Egypt and control it. And then after that, the Assyrians came in and controlled it for a short time. Persians for about 200 years controlled it. Then the Greeks came in, like the Ptolemaic dynasty, sent it back to like Alexander the Great. Then the Romans took it over in the Byzantine period. They controlled Egypt. After that, the Arabs came in with the spread of Islam and took over Egypt. Then up to like the Turks, like the Seljuk and Ottoman Turks would control Egypt. I want to say at least up to around the 19th century. And then the British would come in also and start controlling Egypt between the late 19th up to like World War I, World War II. And so Egypt for a long time is controlled by other powers. So yeah, that's a good review, of the different study guide questions I've got in there for the first exam. Like I said, that assignment will be later due probably sometime. It'll probably be pushed back. I know because I usually extend quizzes, but I'm thinking like in that week after Mardi Gras, ends is when that'll be kind of when it'll be probably due. But you do have you can, like I said, turn in study guides. A lot of the study guides, they do have to be at least from prehistory up through, I think the last phase will be like the part of the Phoenicians and Israelites, which I'll get into like next week. But that's the only topic I'm going to have on the first exam, of course, will be ancient Egypt. So if you have a question about this review or anything about the lecture, you can, of course, put comments, of course, with this video on YouTube, or also don't forget in Canvas discussions, you can also leave comments as well. So that's pretty much it, of course, for this review for the study guide for the first exam.